Imagine your bank saying, "Trust us. You don't need these records." Or your doctor saying, "Trust us. You don't need to see these test results." Or even imagine your supervisor at work saying, "Trust us. We'll explain it to you later after you work this double shift." But you wouldn't accept that in your own life because trust isn't something that people can just demand from one another. Trust is something that people earn. Yet this week, that's exactly what government keeps asking America to do. As Trump says talks with Iran are going very well, while Iran-linked reporting says communications have broken down and Congress is literally moving to limit the president's war powers. Trump is already claiming fraud in California before vote counting is even complete. And the White House is reportedly closing reporters out of a UFC event being held at the People's House unless the UFC grants access. So today, Congress held yet another briefing on federal secrets, declassification, and government transparency while public trust in institutions continues to erode.
Americans see this clearly. They understand that equal treatment under the law has become a joke. They know that accountability is dead when powerful people face no meaningful consequences. And they recognize that both parties benefit from a system where regular people get prosecuted while politicians get book deals. The trust deficit isn't about policy disagreements or partisan messaging. It's about fundamental fairness and basic competence. Americans want a government that works for them, not against them. They want leaders who follow the same laws they do. They want consequences for corruption, regardless of party affiliation.
These are different stories with the same pattern, with the same demand. Trust us. Trust us on the war, on the election. Trust us on who's allowed in the room. But trust is something that the government has to earn from us, and tonight we're asking what happens when the people asking for more authority keep giving us fewer and fewer reasons to trust it. This is The Quiet Loud. I'm D'Anthony Collins. So let's get into it. Let's talk a little bit about the war that keeps on ending somehow. Because if the war is over, why is Congress still trying to stop it? Every few days, we're told the same thing. The war is calming down. The crisis is ending, right? Diplomacy is working. And then we wake up to yet another headline of another strike, another threat, another warning, emergency meetings happening, and nothing coming of it, right? Reuters reported this week that President Trump says negotiations with Iran remain ongoing. But like I said earlier, Iran-linked reporting says communications have effectively broken down after Israel escalated military operations in Lebanon. So let's stop right there real quick, because both of those things can't be true at the same time. Either negotiations are moving forward or negotiations are frozen. Either diplomacy is working or diplomacy is not working. But that's the problem. The public keeps getting two completely different versions of reality depending on who's doing the talking. And while politicians argue over the narrative, the facts keep piling up on us. Israel continues military operations. Hezbollah is rejecting any ceasefire arrangements. Iran is tying broader negotiations to what happens over in Lebanon. So Congress has no choice but to limit the presidential war powers. So let's think about that for a second, because the House has advanced a resolution aimed at restricting military action against Iran, something that they were heavily reluctant to do in the beginning. The Senate has advanced a similar effort, so that should tell you something. Republicans, we're seeing, are joining Democrats to get this done because not everything is under control. Because lawmakers are increasingly worried that it isn't under control. And that's where this becomes more than a foreign policy story. Because every time stability hits the Middle East, it eventually comes back home. It hits our wallets. Every threat to our shipping routes, every disruption in the Strait of Hormuz, every missile launch, every escalation that we see coming from all the involved nations. It eventually shows up at the gas station, on delivery costs, on the prices of our groceries. And that's why this matters. Not because most Americans can find Lebanon on a map, but because they can absolutely find the gas station. They can absolutely find their way to the grocery store. So when we're told that everything is calming down while Congress is voting like it isn't, that's not just a contradiction. That is a warning sign that what's being told to us is so far beyond the truth, nowhere near close to reality. Because if the war is really ending, then why is everybody acting like it isn't? So we're also watching the fraud playbook return. Trump is claiming fraud before the story is even told, before the votes are even counted. Let's talk about California here. If it sounds familiar, that's because it is. Vote counting is still underway in California. Parts of California anyway. Election officials are doing exactly what elections officials are supposed to do. They're supposed to get the votes in, count the votes, verify the ballots, follow their procedures, finish up their process. And before that process is even complete, Trump is already talking about fraud. Again, not after the count, not after any certifications or investigations or concessions, before the count is done. All right? What are we doing? The Guardian reported this week that Trump is escalating claims about California elections despite experts finding no evidence at all to support those allegations. He tried making those same allegations on Meet the Press, and the host was not having it. She shut that down, and she was asking him, in not a vulgar way, but Kristen Welker was pushing back. She was saying, hey, you've made these allegations before. They've been unfounded. You've not presented any evidence. Oh, there's plenty of evidence, Trump says. Well, she says, hey, you haven't presented any of this evidence in court. So where's this evidence? You've taken this to court. You didn't present this evidence. You make these allegations in public, but you don't say them when it really matters in a court of law, when you're filing these fraud claims that seemingly go nowhere, And guess what he did? He ended up getting up and walking out of there because he can't stand up to the scrutiny. Okay? We've seen this movie before because the goal isn't necessarily to prove fraud. It wasn't to prove fraud against Joe Biden when he asked the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, to say that there was an investigation against Joe Biden. He even told them, doesn't matter if you're really doing it, just say you are. The goal is creating doubt. If people don't trust the process, they become easier to manipulate. Okay? You tell them that this is going on. They don't trust anything anyway. And that is exactly what he wants. He doesn't care if they trust him or not. He just doesn't want them to trust anything else. That's why the first thing coming out of his mouth as president was fake news. News is the media is the enemy of the people. Right? And here's why that matters to most normal people. Your vote only has value if people believe the count actually matters. If politicians can convince millions of Americans that the elections are fake before ballots are even counted, then voting becomes just theater. All right? And democracy itself becomes something that powerful people can negotiate among themselves. We've seen this when they convince people that there's no need to go out and vote because their vote doesn't matter. They've already won. Okay? This matters not because it's California or because it's Trump, but because every election moving forward now has to survive not only actual voting, getting voters to the ballot box and getting the ballots into the counties, but preemptive attacks on the legitimacy of the count itself. And that should concern everybody, regardless of your party affiliation. So let's talk about who gets access to that power, because the White House belongs to the public. So we have to ask the question that why is a private company controlling access to the people's house? I know this next story is going to sound strange, but stay with me, all right? Because it's actually bigger than it sounds. The Washington Post reported that reporters may be blocked from attending a UFC event being held on White House grounds that now looks like some kind of a carnival event unless the UFC itself approves their access. Now let's read that again, because a private sports organization potentially deciding who gets access to an event being held at the people's house, the White House. Let's be clear. This isn't about whether you like UFC or Dana White or whether you even care about sports. This is about freedom of the press and their access, because journalism works best when reporters can ask those uncomfortable questions. The entire purpose of a free press is that they're not supposed to need permission from the government or from any other powerful people to observe what powerful people are doing and report on it. But increasingly, we're seeing a different model emerge, okay? We're seeing, career journalists being knocked down off 60 Minutes. We're seeing all kinds of truth tellers having been taken aim by this administration. They only want friendly influencers, friendly podcasters, friendly interviewers, which is why he got up and stormed off on Kristen Welker, like I said before. Friendly media. That's what he wants. He wants to control access and environments and the narrative itself. And that's where this becomes a bigger than just one UFC event. Okay? Because if public access increasingly depends on private approval, which Trump seems to be dialing in private enterprise more and more into events happening in the public sphere, that shouldn't be happening. Because increasingly we're seeing that he has some stake in what's going on there. He even has some stake in this UFC event. He is invested in their parent company. All right. So when public access depends more on what people at private enterprise are saying, then accountability slowly becomes just who they have on their guest list. Okay. It's not about the public anymore. And that's not how democratic institutions are supposed to work. All right. We're being locked out of everything. Access is being controlled. Transparency is being kept from us. There's no such thing as accountability anymore. It's just the secrets that they keep from us. Okay. Transparency can't be done in a pool spray on the White House lawn or at a press conference. Transparency is proof, is evidence, is showing your work. Okay. Today, Congress held another briefing connected to federal secrets and declassification efforts, and immediately people started asking the same questions. So what are we going to find out about JFK or about Epstein or about UFOs? What about intelligence records or what about classified files? And honestly, none of those are unreasonable questions, but that's not what they talked about today. They talked a little bit more about what's been going on with UAP and that kind of thing. So they had bipartisan congressmen come out from this task force and congresswomen. Anna Paulina Luna was there. Journalists and whistleblowers, you name it, were out there to talk a little bit more about what they've seen. And we've seen them talk a little bit more loosely about what they're hearing in these classified briefings now. And you'd be surprised to hear some of these things that are coming out, but because this is not a salacious podcast, I'm not going to get into that. I'm going to ask you to go and check out that task force on declassifying federal secrets, okay? And see what they had to say on Tuesday afternoon. You check that out and hit me up in the comments, okay? But like I said, the questions that they were asking were not unreasonable questions. These are things that we need to know, because increasingly Americans believe that they're not getting the full story about almost anything when it comes to our health, the wars that we're involved in, intelligence. I mean, the director of national intelligence just got up and left, and now we know that a Trump sycophant has just been offered the job. Okay? So intelligence, we don't know if we can trust that. We don't know that we have been trusting what our 17, 18 intelligence agencies in the community have even been telling the government so far. All right? That goes through intelligence, like I said, through politics, through governmental records. We still haven't seen at least maybe 3 million documents related to the Epstein files, okay? So here's the point. The issue isn't whether every conspiracy theory is true. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. The issue is why so many Americans believe that they're being lied to in the first place. Because trust has become one of the most depleted resources in our American life. People don't trust government. They're starting to not trust our media. People don't trust the institutions, especially after Doge, and they doggone sure don't trust the experts anymore. People don't seem to trust each other, their neighbors, anyone. And once that trust disappears, everything becomes vulnerable to conspiracy, because secrecy creates vacuums. And people are always going to fill that vacuum with something. And the solution to that isn't more secrecy. The solution isn't just them demanding our trust. The solution is open transparency. You know, assuming that the American people have a brain and trusting that we can discern, what's happening here, giving us actual transparency, not performative transparency, not carefully managed narratives, but real transparency. Because if government wants people to trust in our institutions again, it has to stop. It has to stop acting like information belongs to the government and not in the hands of the people. Okay? There's a freedom of information for a reason. I know some things get wrapped up in national security, but you can't say everything is a national security concern just because you don't want to tell us about it. All right? That's Trump's struggle with reality right now. And it's not just Trump, it's the government. The government has been cagey. They have not been telling us everything, but Trump's war with reality is just ridiculous now. We're starting to see The fight isn't just about Trump versus Democrats. It's Trump versus the limits of what he can do inside of his own coalition. One of the easiest mistakes to make in politics is assuming that every story is Democrats versus Republicans. It's not. We'll be wise to learn that it's more of a class nature right now, especially what Trump and his cronies are trying to do. All right. Now, sometimes it is true. Sometimes it is Democrats and Republicans, but sometimes the real fight is happening inside of their coalition itself, or sometimes even inside of the Democratic coalition. Let's look at what's happened over the past few weeks. Republicans have struggled to advance parts of Trump's agenda. Congress is now pushing back on war powers. The SAVE Act has been rejected, and it just continues to run into obstacles. Republican lawmakers are increasingly divided over their funding priorities and how to do it. Okay. They're confused on election messaging, on foreign policy, immigration, and their political strategy even headed into the midterms is not exactly sure. I mean, but I can't speak to Democrats. Theirs isn't much better, or at least that's not what we've seen yet. Hopefully they have something that they're gonna just roll out and hit us with. Now, that's not to say that Democrats haven't stepped up and haven't been more forceful in their language and their rhetoric. They have been, but we don't see any real strategy coalescing right now. It can't just be anti-Trump. We've lost on that message before. Even though, Trump's approval is dipping into the low 30s now, we can't count on the fact we see redistricting happen. We see the election fraud claims happening. We cannot just depend on people hate Trump. Okay. So, like I said, we're watching the cracks happen from inside of the Republican base as well. And the cracks aren't always dramatic, but they are becoming harder to ignore. We're seeing more and more people start to break with Trump inside the legislature, but also on the ground. All right. His supporters now are dropping that MAGA slogan as fast as they possibly can because he's embarrassing them. He's an embarrassment. Governing is different from campaigning. Campaigns can run on slogans, but governments have to run on reality. You can go out and make all kind of pie in the sky. We're going to build a wall and Mexico's going to pay for it. But the reality is if you're not making a holistic approach to border security, then you're going to end up with a tunnel coming right from Tijuana to San Diego. All right. Reality has rules, y'all. Reality needs votes. Reality gets budgets and has consequences as well. Reality doesn't care about Republican branding or golden ballrooms. All right. And that's why all this matters. Not because Washington insiders are fighting amongst themselves, but because when governing coalitions like MAGA become unstable, everything around them starts to become unstable because they're not trusting them anymore and they can see the manipulation that's happening with them. So we see the market volatility and policies not getting to come to fruition inside of Congress and budget fights happening and agencies and all kinds of disarray. All right. Our lives are feeling this chaos. And increasingly, it feels like we're watching an administration ask for more, everything, more power, more trust, while running into more limits, more resistance, more scrutiny. Nobody wants to see, these AI facilities showing up in their small towns. Nobody wants to see ICE coming into their neighborhood. Nobody wants to see their tax dollars paying for, ICE rolling up in their streets. Okay? So more scrutiny, more resistance, and more questions come, and they ought to. Because trust is not soft. Trust hardens our infrastructure. And you need trust to believe that the vote counts, to believe that your government is telling the truth, to believe that wars are ending when leaders are saying that they're ending. All right? To believe that public institutions are doing what they're supposed to do, which is serving the public. And this week, across every story we covered, the same question keeps appearing. Not whether government is asking for our trust. Government always wants our trust. The question is whether or not the government, whether Trump, whether Republicans, whether even Democrats have earned it. Because sooner or later, every issue becomes personal. When you go to the grocery store, when you're buying gas, when you're going to seek health care, when you go to put your ballot in that ballot box, your family, your future. If trust keeps on eroding and disappearing, all of those things become harder to protect. All right, so if you found any value in this episode at all, please like, subscribe, comment, share this. Join our quiet quorum. All right, we'll see you around. Till next time, I'm DeAnthony Collins. Y'all stay informed, stay grounded, and stay loud quietly. This has been a Quiet Loud. Y'all take care.